Good afternoon. Thank you for attending this Top Desk webinar on service level management. Firstly, I'd like to introduce myself. My name's Sarah Bilton, and I'm a consultant based in the Manchester office in the Top Desk UK branch. Firstly, some housekeeping for those who haven't used the GoToWebinar before. On your right-hand side, you'll see a small panel which you can expand and collapse with the orange arrow. Here, you can type in any questions that you have throughout the webinar, and this is being monitored by my colleague, Amy. If we don't get a chance to reply to your questions during the webinar, all answers will be sent via email once the webinar is ended. The webinar itself is being recorded and will be on YouTube. If you do have to leave early, or if you have colleagues who are unable to attend the webinar, we'll be sending a link out again at the end of the webinar. The estimated time of the webinar today is around 35 minutes. But again, if you do have to leave early, you'll be sent the recording. Brill. So, what are we going to talk about today? Firstly, I'd like to go through some definitions before we look actually within the tool itself. So our starting point is, what are SLAs and why are we going to use them? We're then going to have a look at what SLAs should include, which will bring us on to 6 steps to creating effective SLAs within Top Desk. Once we've outlined how to create an SLA, I'm just going to do a short demonstration of how we can manage a ticket using an SLA within Top Desk. This is an introductory webinar, so if you haven't used this module before, or if you've begun to implement, but you may have left it to one side for a while, this is just some inspiration to get you started, perhaps. A second note, we will be covering these topics rather quickly. When you are setting up the SLA module with your Top Desk consultant, I promise it will go at a far slower pace than we will this afternoon. Okay, so firstly, service level management and supplier contract management is our module in Top Desk. But what actually is this and who does it involve? So, we have ourselves in the middle, our service organization. So we are a service provider, whether that's for IT, for facilities, for human resources, etc. On the left-hand side, we have the relationship between ourselves and our customers. So we have our customer who may have particular requirements, and we have the conversation with them where we're showing the services that we provide via our service catalogue. That relationship is formally expressed within an SLA contract. On the right-hand side, we have the relationship between ourselves and our suppliers, and that relationship is expressed with a vendor contract. Now, this is really a tale of two halves. We've got both sides there of the relationship, but it's useful to remember that although the end user and the supplier may not see one another, that this is part of a complete process between the customer, ourselves, and the end supplier. Now, today, we're going to be focusing purely on the relationship between ourselves and our customers. The relationship between ourselves and our suppliers will be addressed in a second webinar on contract management later on this year. So first off, why should we use service level agreements within our organisation? Some of the service desk staff that I've encountered whilst being on site aren't keen to use service level agreements. They feel like they're going to be ring fenced by using the SLAs, that they're going to be contracted to do things that are outside of their remit, or that they have targets which just aren't achievable. And I understand that, but that's really not what the purpose of service level agreements is. To use service level agreements, the purpose is to manage the expectations of the customer so that they have an idea as to what services that we provide and a reasonable time that they can expect us to resolve their issues. By using these, we can easily prioritize the notifications or the incidents that are coming through from either the self-service portal via email. We can categorize and prioritize those in a way, again, adhering to that response time for the customer. And then finally, when it comes to actually reviewing our relationship between ourselves and our customer, through reports, we can establish, do we actually come to the agreements that we've set out together? We can then have very specific reports created to show, okay, this is the amount of times that we've maybe breached an SLA, where we can go in and review, okay, what's happening there? Are the terms realistic? So in order to use an SLA, we next need to work out what is it that we're actually going to put within the SLA. The first point being that the SLA is this contract and agreement with the customer. And we have internal there, but really this could be used for external also. It just may be that we have slightly different terminology that's used, whether it's an internal customer or whether it's an external customer. We'll look at those differences a little later on when we're designing the SLA. So we have our contracts or agreements with specific customers, or it may be with specific areas of the business. Within those contracts, we outline the services that we're going to provide that customer and specify if those services are going to be provided at a different service level. So it may be that a particular service is crucial to this customer's operation, and therefore we're going to decide between us that the service level for that one service is maybe above the other services that we provide them. This brings me on to my next point of lead times. So within lead times, again, for a specific service, we may have a shorter lead time to resolve that incident. Additionally, the new functionality that's now available in labs in SaaS shows the response time. So that's something that will be being rolled out to our on-premise customers in due course, but it's an additional area to consider. Have you specified in your contract a response time that you need to adhere to? Have you specified in your contract particular points where a customer needs to be updated as you're resolving their ticket? These are all areas that we can outline within our contracts and agreements. We can also add in any information that's pertinent to the end user on where their service is being underpinned by a supplier contract. And this may be that we need to add in a warning where there's a particular lead time which may be longer. This is just for visibility to our customer, that they understand the process that we're executing in order to satisfy their incident. Which brings me to my next question: who creates the SLA? And as you can see here, the answer isn't just one particular person. There should be a group of people involved in creating these SLAs. So we should have our service level manager for the service department that we're creating the SLA for. So whether this is the head of IT and the head of facilities. We may additionally bring in the head of the service desk for this department as well, who can give some more information as to what's realistic for their service desk to be able to achieve on a day-to-day basis. And then finally, we should have a representative of our customers here at the table as well. So they can tell us information as to what's really important for them, for their service provision, and we can discuss what are realistic SLA lead times for both sides so that everyone is clear. So how do we actually translate this idea of SLAs within Topdesk? So firstly, I'm going to go through 3 steps that we're going to look at for designing our SLAs, and we're then going to look at the practical example of how we're going to build that within Topdesk. So first off, let's start by talking about our services. So at Topdesk, we have services as a central idea within our application. And the best way to communicate to your customers what it is that you can do for them, what you can offer them, is to define the services that we provide to them and organize this within a service catalog. This then allows the customer to go in and access an overview of the services that are available to them. And really, an analogy for this is to think of the service catalog like you would a restaurant menu. So when you arrive at a restaurant, you're given the menu. We can all read through it at our leisure. We understand what's available that day, what we can expect. We can also, from the restaurant menu, determine what's not available as standard from the customers. So if we need to make an amendment to a particular order, or if we ask for something that's off the menu, then it's reasonable then that we understand that those requirements may take a little longer. This then influences the customer's expectations as to how long something may take. And that's exactly the same in our circumstance as well. If we define what our core services are and our customer asks for something which is outside of those realms, then it sets their expectations that perhaps we will be able to provide that, however, it may take longer than usual. So once we have our services, we can then think about the different levels that we may provide a response for. So it may be that service 1, we have 3 levels of service provision, which could be understood as standard and an enhanced, or we could phrase it as bronze level, silver, gold. Now, for our internal customers, we would expect that this should just be the same across the board, that no matter who you are within an organization, you're given the same level of service. We don't have different contracts depending on department normally. However, it still could be useful to build more than one level of service. And the reason for that is if we have a particular service, so for example, it could be our Outlook and emails, or it could be the telephony system, which is core to the business as a whole, then maybe the response time, if there's ever an issue with that particular service, is raised above all others. So a priority 1 for such a service may be that we need a 3-hour target date to have got that service back up and running. Whereas for other services, for their level 1 service, it may be that we'll allow 5 hours to get that priority 1 incident up and running. So it's still useful to be able to distinguish between service levels. It's worth noting here that we can reuse different service levels per service. I know that in an older version of Topdesk, in version 5, you had to create service levels per service. In Topdesk 6, no, we don't need to do that now. You can just reuse those. So once we've determined what our services are and the levels to which we can provide those services, we can then have a think about, okay, for a particular customer, let's tailor a contract specific to their needs. So in this example, this customer has service 1 and service 3 at level 3, and yet service 2 is only at level 2. So for this customer, service 1 and 3, we can assume is core to their business. These service levels can be labeled to anything that aligns with how you currently would distinguish between levels of service. Okay, so we've thought about our services, that they can be provided at different levels of an experience, and we can combine services and include them in a contract with a customer. So that's very good, but how do we build that in Topdesk? So I'd like to go through 6 points now, which will give some more information as to how we can build this practically within Topdesk. So I'm going to start with looking at the service window, the service catalog, what we should be including in the service catalog. Then to look at our service window, when will we be providing the services? To then have a little look at more in depth of the services themselves. What is it that we provide? What should we be telling the customer of that service? How we may filter that service? How we can apply different service levels, and then how we tie this all together at the end to build our contract with the customer. So to start with, the service catalog. As I've said earlier, if we can show this on the self-service portal, the services that we provide, it means that it's far clearer for the users to understand what they can expect from us. So this is just an example of some services that an end user may expect building around their workspace. So as we think of building the service catalog, what are the services that we provide? We're thinking of the details of the services as well. We'll have a look at further details of what we can include on the service card in a few slides' time. So second to the service catalog is the service window. So this example is a standard service window. We start at 8:30 and we close the desk at 5 o'clock. That means anything that, say, comes in at 4:30 in the afternoon, well, we have half an hour, and then it will then move over and we'll continue the time ticking at 8:30 in the morning the next day. So that's an example of a standard service window. However, we can have multiple service windows built into Topdesk. So for example, here is the standard service window again, but this time it includes weekends as well. So it may be that for a particular service, which needs to be up and running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, we're going to use an additional service window to make sure that's maintained. Or for those of us who are catering to external customers, it may be that we can provide and negotiate within our contract that for certain customers, we'll have either extended hours or we'll also provide a weekend service. It's worth thinking about as we're exploring service windows that we live within our means when we're creating these, that we have the resources to be able to offer a late finish or weekend services before we negotiate anything with our customers. Once we've understood our service windows, we can then go about adding information to those services that we'd outlined in the service catalogue. So here, it should be clear to the end user, even if they aren't tech savvy, if maybe they don't understand some of the services that you provide. From reading this information on the self-service portal, they should be clear with what they can access from you and what the terms of supply with that are. So It may be that we note here specific lead times or information that we'll require to fulfill a request. But here really all of the details should be clear for our end user. And once we've created this service, we can then be explicit and say, okay, there's 3 levels of service level that are aligned to this particular service. So for my printer service, we have bronze, silver, and gold, which we can then apply to different contracts. And you'll see under the section titled Availability that this particular service is only going to show in the operator side if we choose the category network and data communication and the subcategory printer. That means as we build these services up, we're not going to be bombarded with information on the operator side. This point will become a little bit clearer when we do the walkthrough. So yeah, we saw on the previous slide for the printing service that there were 3 levels of service applied to this. We had bronze, silver, and gold. And just to take a look at the gold card here, we can see that for this gold level of service, we have a specific priority matrix so that we can tailor that depending on this service level. And we can see that we can specify the duration for those priorities at the top as well. So if we look here, we can see that for a first line duration, where it's a priority 1, our response time is 1 hour. However, if we were looking at the silver card, it may be that for a priority 1, a response time is 4 hours, depending on the service level that's picked. Another point to make is here, the service window. We can apply different service windows to different priorities. And this is especially useful if, for example, our priority 1s need to be up and running 24/7 as a service window. If we've got the capability and resources to achieve that, then we can specify a higher service window for those high priorities and maybe just standard operations for the lower priorities. But we have that flexibility. And then our final stage is we've looked at our service levels. We've applied these realistically to the different services. Okay, we're now in a position where we can build a contract with our customers. So on this contract, we can specify here who this is applicable to. It may be a general contract if we're dealing with internal customers, or it may be specific to a branch or its subsidiaries, or a department, depending on their needs and how we've set up our top desk environment. Why the branch and subsidiaries is useful. Even if you're internal and you're dealing with internal customers, it may be that due to geography that you just can't supply the same turnaround time because of the time that may be taken to get to other sites. Obviously, if we're dealing with external customers, we can specify this on a customer by customer basis. Great. So we've went through the 6 areas that we'll need to create successful SLAs. And I'd just like to go through one common question that I see on site before we go into the walkthrough as to how we can process our tickets with SLAs. And that is, what's the difference between the priority matrix and SLAs? So we should all be familiar with the priority matrix when setting up incident management, that we have our impact and urgency, and then we can specify different priorities to this. And in essence, the priority matrix and our SLAs are very similar in their setup, but we can think about the priority matrix as it's a one-size-fits-all. It's a matrix that no matter what the issue is, if, for example, it affects the whole organization, and they are unable to work, it's always going to be a priority one. By using SLAs and applying those different service levels on a service-by-service basis, it means that we have far more flexibility in building quite comprehensive SLAs, which are really tailored around our core services. And how will that look when we're processing tickets? So again, we'll see this in real life when we do our walkthrough in a moment. But here we can see the planning block and the main difference when you're using just the priority matrix on the left and where we've applied an SLA on the right. We can see that on the left, we can still change our duration. However, when we've applied an SLA, the duration is locked down. We can still specify the impact and our urgency, but the SLA is concrete. Great, so now I'd like to go into a short demonstration as to how we can process a ticket and apply an SLA to that ticket. So we have an example here of a scenario. Topdesk UK has taken over the services from an outsourced IT department. It's promised its staff a 24/7 support and a solution to their problems within 24 hours. The issue today, though, is that within the Manchester office, there's been a failure of our printer. So let's now log that within Topdesk. So we should all be familiar with this view. This is our self-service portal. And let's now log a ticket for our printer. So I'm going to go to my workspace, printer services, where I can go through all of the terms on the printer services. But I'm going to log a ticket. So the malfunction issue is the printer won't turn on. It's obviously one I've done before. Please describe the malfunction. Oh. Put it in caps lock. I'm clearly very angry about this. Does this issue affect more than one user? Yes, it does. It affects the whole office. And which printer is it? Okay, I know my printer ID. It's printer 100. There we go. So my ticket's been logged. And I'm now in the operator side. So I'm logged in as Dawn Meadows, who's the head of our service desk. And let's find that ticket. So here we go. Okay, so John Dean, who I was logged in as on the self-service portal side. So all of his details have came through. As you can see, he's in the Topdesk UK branch. And then what do we have here? So the form has categorized all of the details of the ticket. We can see here that it's specified that it's on network data and printer. So that aligns to the service that we provide. It's filled in some information based on the priority matrix. However, if I click to link service, then it's linked our SLA terms, so for that specific printer service that we offer. Great, so when I save that, we suddenly have a different priority, we have a different turnaround time, and it specifies to us how much time we have remaining to fulfill that call. And that's the main difference that we have between using the priority matrix and using SLAs when it comes to processing the tickets. Let's go back now into our presentation. Great. So that's the end of our webinar today on SLA management. So just to recap the topics that we've covered are looking at our services, ensuring that our services are aligned in a service catalogue, determining the levels of service that we can offer our customers, and pulling that information together to create contracts that both we as the service provider and our end users that we can both agree on. We've then went through and looked at how we can build that practically within Topdesk, and I've just demonstrated there how that will look for the operators who are filling in and processing the tickets on the operator side of Topdesk. If you have any questions, I provided my email address here, and also any questions that have been given through the tab on the right-hand side. We'll endeavour to reply to all of these questions via email at the end of the webinar. So, thank you for attending. Our next webinar is on the 5th of April at 11 o'clock and is on action sequences with my colleague Martijn. So I hope you can make it there. Yeah, we hope to see you in our next webinar, and thank you for listening.